Clear reports Soviet and Russian-made aircraft are still the backbone of the Afghan Air Force.
Russian influence never really left Afghanistan, least of all in the small Afghan Air Corps, where all 45 aircraft are either Russian or Soviet-made. Many of the roughly 3,000 personnel were trained by Russian pilots. For 18 years, Hamayum Hotek has been flying this Mi-17 chopper, and like his Afghan co-pilots, he's more comfortable behind its controls than anywhere else.
These helicopters work in Afghanistan. They are very powerful, very simple, and they suit the environment. All of us Afghan pilots have been flying them for many years.
From humble beginnings in the 1920s, the Afghan National Army Air Corps was at its strongest in the 80s. This was largely because of Soviet assistance as the USSR fought the Mujahideen. But most of the Air Corps was destroyed in 2001 by foreign forces reacting to the events of September the 11th. Nowadays, the Americans are trying to get the Afghan Air Force off the ground again, although they say they haven't quite got to grips with the aircraft they're training on.
We're not as familiar with them as some of the Afghans, just because we haven't been exposed to them for a long time. We all go through some training in the U.S. on some of these aircraft that we have there, and we get a pretty good baseline of how to fly the aircraft and the different maintenance aspects of it. And then we come over here in order to advise the Afghans, and we learn a lot more.
They wouldn't need to learn as much if Russian experts could help, which is just one of the issues underpinning NATO's Secretary-General Anders Fogh Rasmussen's visit to Moscow. Others include Russian-made weapons and ammunition making their way to Afghanistan. All eyes here are following closely discussions in Moscow over whether or not Russia and NATO will agree to deliver Russian weapons to the Afghan National Army and security forces. Also on the table is the possibility of servicing and modernizing Russian equipment already being used in this country.
I think the negotiations will be successful. Russia has already contributed at the beginning of the Afghan campaign. It has supplied $20 million worth of arms to the Northern Alliance, the army of Afghanistan. The only question is the price. We can't supply for free, like some NATO countries suggest. We're not sponsors or participants of NATO operations in Afghanistan.
Colonel Abdul Halim Karohi says he and his men welcome Russian involvement. Not only does he have fond memories of his student years in Russia, but he says Afghanistan, and its Air Force in particular, would benefit greatly if a deal was reached in Moscow.
The Russians taught me everything I know, and they can help us develop even more. We're trying to build our Air Force so we can support Afghan ground troops in the future. Right now, most of what we do is transportation, though.
Afghan President Hamid Karzai says it will take at least another 15 years before his police force is strong enough to stand on its own feet. It's likely to take his Air Force some time as well, which is why support is eagerly awaited. Paula Sleer, RT, Afghanistan.